There's a certain kind of trust you expect in a 15-year marriage. A sense of security that lets you focus on building a life together without constantly looking over your shoulder. That's how I felt as I sat in my office on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, sifting through emails after a productive meeting with clients. My career as a financial advisor was thriving, my marriage to Nathan seemed stable, and our lakeside cabin in Vermont represented everything we'd worked for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Then, with one phone call, that illusion of security shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Mrs. Sinclair? This is Elaine Peterson. I'm your neighbor up at Silver Lake. I smiled, picturing the sweet elderly woman whose property bordered our vacation home. Elaine, what a nice surprise. How are you? I'm well, dear, but... She hesitated, her voice dropping. I thought you should know there's been someone staying at your cabin for the past month, a young woman. I assumed she was family, but when I introduced myself yesterday, she said she was Nathan's wife. My hand froze on the mouse. I'm sorry, she said what? His wife, dear. When I mentioned knowing you, she seemed confused, said her name was Melanie. Sinclair. I knew something wasn't right, so I thought I should call you directly. The world tilted sideways. I gripped the edge of my desk, trying to steady myself as Elaine continued. The thing is, Mrs. Sinclair, Rebecca, she's quite pregnant. At least 7 months along, I'd say. The office around me blurred. My throat constricted, making it difficult to form words. Elaine, thank you for calling. I'll handle this. I hung up, my mind spinning with fragments of memories and clues I'd overlooked. Nathan's increased business trips to Boston over the past year. The way he'd discouraged my visits to the cabin, claiming the roof needed repairs or the plumbing was acting up. His insistence that we needed separate bank accounts for tax purposes. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. I opened my laptop and checked our joint credit card statements, scrolling back through months of transactions. There they were, purchases at maternity stores, baby boutiques, and Vermont. Grocery stores during weeks when Nathan was supposedly at conferences. He hadn't even bothered to hide the evidence. Why would he? He never expected me to look. My finger hovered over Nathan's contact information on my phone. What would I even say? How does one start that conversation? Excuse me, darling, but are you setting up a second family in our vacation home? Instead, I called my closest friend, Diane. He did what? Her voice exploded through the speaker after I explained the situation. I don't have all the details yet, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. But I need to see it with my own eyes. Can you come with me to Vermont tomorrow? I'll pick you up at 7, she said without hesitation. And Rebecca? Bring documentation proving you own that cabin. The property records. Of course. I pulled open my filing cabinet, retrieving the folder marked Vacation Property. The lakeside cabin had been purchased 6 years ago, primarily with money I'd inherited from my parents. While both our names were on the deed, the majority of the investment had been mine, a fact that had never seemed significant until now. As I gathered the documents, my phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Working late. The familiar excuse now carried the weight of 1,000 lies. How many late nights had actually been spent with her, with Melanie? How many weekends had he been building a life with his pregnant girlfriend while I carried on oblivious, trusting him completely? I didn't respond to the text. There was no point. Tomorrow would bring answers, and those answers would determine everything that followed. That night, I moved methodically through our house, seeing it through new eyes. The wedding photos on the mantel, the matching robes hanging in our bathroom, the plans for a kitchen renovation we'd discussed just last week. Had any of it been real? Or was I simply a convenience, a facade he maintained while building the life he truly wanted elsewhere? In our bedroom, I opened Nathan's dresser drawers, searching for… what? I wasn't sure. More evidence? Confirmation that the man I'd built my life around was a stranger? In the back of his sock drawer, I found a small black notebook. Inside were numbers, dates, reminders, and ultrasound appointments. The most recent entry, dated just 2 weeks ago. M's baby shower. Don't forget gift from registry. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, the notebook clutched in my trembling hands. The betrayal was so complete, so methodically executed, that it left me breathless. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a single instance of weakness. This was a double life, carefully constructed and maintained. While I worked 60-hour weeks building our financial future, he had been using our resources, my resources, to create a parallel existence with another woman. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I photographed every page of the notebook, every credit card statement, every property document. Then I called my lawyer, Martin Greenberg. "Martin, I need emergency advice," I said when he picked up. "And I need to know what my options are for bringing police assistance to reclaim property." The next morning, as Diane drove us toward Vermont, I stared out the window at the passing landscape. The familiar route to our vacation home, my vacation home, now felt like a journey into unknown territory. "What are you going to do when you see her?" Diane asked, breaking the silence. I considered the question carefully. The initial shock had hardened into something colder, more controlled. "I'm going to remain calm, document everything, and let the law do what it's designed to do," I said. "Nathan doesn't know it yet, but he picked the wrong woman to betray." As we turned onto the winding road leading to Silver Lake, I made a silent promise to myself. This would not destroy me. The cabin represented years of my hard work, my inheritance, my dreams for the future. Nathan had taken my trust, my love, and my years. But he would not take what was rightfully mine. The lake came into view, its surface glittering in the morning sun. And there, nestled among the pines on the shoreline, was the cabin, my sanctuary turned betrayal. A luxury SUV I didn't recognize sat in the driveway. "Ready?" Diane asked, squeezing my hand. I nodded, pulling out my phone to make one final call. "Officer Daniels, this is Rebecca Sinclair. I'm at the property now. Can you meet us as discussed?" Part 1 was ending. The disruption had occurred. Now it was time for the revelation. Officer Daniels pulled up in his patrol car just as Diane and I stepped out of the vehicle. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with a serious expression that matched the gravity of the situation. "Mrs. Sinclair," he said with a professional nod, "I've reviewed the documentation you sent over. Just to confirm, you're the primary owner of this property?" "Yes," I replied, handing him the folder of documents I'd prepared. "My name is on the deed, and I provided over 80% of the purchase price through my inheritance." He glanced through the papers, then looked up at the cabin. "And your husband has moved someone in without your knowledge or consent?" "That's correct." Officer Daniels nodded. "All right, I'll accompany you to the door, but unless there's a threat of violence, this is primarily a civil matter. I'm here to keep the peace while you exercise your property rights." I appreciated his straightforward approach. No judgment, no pity, just protocol. The three of us approached the front door together. I noticed fresh flower boxes beneath the windows, bright red geraniums that hadn't been there during my last visit. Someone had been making themselves at home. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. Beyond this door was the physical evidence of my husband's betrayal. Once I saw her, there would be no going back, no possibility of misunderstanding, no room for denial. Diane squeezed my shoulder. "You've got this." I knocked firmly, 3 sharp raps. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard movement inside, footsteps approaching the door. It swung open, and there she was, the woman who had been living my life without me knowing. She was younger than me, maybe late 20s to my 41 years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, pretty in a girl-next-door way, with honey blonde hair pulled into a messy bun and clear blue eyes that widened in confusion as she took in the scene before her. And she was unmistakably pregnant, her rounded belly prominent beneath a fitted t-shirt that read, "Baby on board." "Can I help you?" she asked, glancing nervously from me to Diane to Officer Daniels. "I'm Rebecca Sinclair," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is my cabin." The color drained from her face. She instinctively placed a protective hand over her stomach. "You're Rebecca?" "Yes, and you must be Melanie." Her eyes darted past us as if looking for an escape route. "Nathan's at work. He won't be back until tonight." "I know exactly where my husband is," I said, though I didn't. "But right now, I'm more concerned about why his pregnant girlfriend is living in my vacation home." She flinched at the word girlfriend, her hand twisting a diamond ring on her left finger. A sickening realization washed over me. "You actually think you're married? To him, don't you?" I asked, the pieces clicking into place. Officer Daniels cleared his throat. "Ma'am, may we come inside? I think there's a situation here that needs to be clarified." Melanie hesitated, then stepped back, allowing us to enter. The cabin's interior was both familiar and strange. The furniture was the same. The leather sectional we'd purchased together, the rustic coffee table, the stone fireplace I'd insisted on during renovations. But there were new elements too, baby books stacked on the side table, a sonogram picture framed on the mantel, a half-assembled crib in the corner. My cabin had become a nursery in progress. "How long have you been with Nathan?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. Melanie sank into an armchair, her hand still protectively covering her belly. 3 years, she said quietly. "We met at a conference in Chicago. He told me he was divorced." 3 years. While I was planning our 10th anniversary vacation, my husband was already building a relationship with another woman. "And when did you get married?" I made air quotes around the word. "Last year, small ceremony in Cape Cod." Her voice was barely audible now. "Just family," I nodded, trying to process this information while maintaining my composure. "Do you have a marriage certificate?" "Of course," she said defensively. "We filed all the paperwork." "May I see it?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Why would I need to show you that?" I pulled out my phone, opened my photos, and handed it to her. On the screen was a picture of my own marriage certificate, dated 15 years ago, alongside a recent tax return showing our married filing status. Melanie stared at the documents, confusion giving way to dawning horror. "I don't understand," she whispered. "He showed me divorce papers. Forged, I'm guessing. Just like whatever marriage certificate you think you have." Tears welled in her eyes. She looked so young suddenly, so vulnerable. Despite everything, I felt a flash of compassion. She was as much Nathan's victim as I was, perhaps more so, with a baby on the way. "I'm 7 months pregnant," she said, as if I couldn't see that for myself. "I know," I replied. "And I'm sorry that Nathan has put you in this position. But this is my property, and I need you to leave." Officer Daniels stepped forward. "Given the circumstances, I'd suggest you pack some essential items now, ma'am. You can arrange to collect the rest of your belongings later." Melanie looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Where am I supposed to go? My lease in Boston is gone. All my things are here." The reality of what Nathan had done sank in further. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had created a situation where this pregnant woman was entirely dependent on him, isolated in a remote cabin, hours from her previous home. Despite my anger, I couldn't bring myself to throw a pregnant woman out with nowhere to go. "You can have until tomorrow," I said, surprising even myself. "I'll stay at the local inn tonight, but I want you gone by noon tomorrow, and I want a key to my cabin left on the counter." Relief flooded her features. "Thank you," she whispered. As she excused herself to make some calls, presumably to Nathan, I walked through the rest of the cabin. Our bedroom, my bedroom, had been completely transformed. Nathan's clothes filled the closet alongside unfamiliar women's clothing. On the nightstand sat prenatal vitamins and a book of baby names with pages marked. In the guest bathroom, 2 toothbrushes stood in a holder. His and hers towels hung from the rack. The domestic scene was so ordinary, so convincing, that for a moment I questioned my own reality. Had I imagined the last 15 years? Was I the interloper here? No. The property documents in my folder grounded me. The wedding ring on my finger anchored me to the truth. Nathan Sinclair was my husband, and this was my cabin. Everything else was an elaborate fiction he had constructed, a house of cards, that was now collapsing. As I stepped back into the living room, my phone buzzed. A text from Nathan. "Working late again. Don't wait up." The same message as yesterday, sent to a different woman. I showed the screen to Melanie, who had returned red-eyed from making her calls. "He just sent me the exact same text," she said, holding up her own phone, and that's when the full revelation hit both of us. Nathan Sinclair wasn't just a cheater or a liar. He was a con man who had built his entire life on carefully orchestrated deceptions. The question now was, what else didn't we know? The weight of our shared revelation hung in the air between us. I looked at Melanie, this stranger who knew the Albaria, same man I did, yet clearly didn't know him at all, and tried to process what our next steps should be. Officer Daniels broke the silence. "Mrs. Sinclair, I'd recommend you speak with your attorney about filing for an emergency injunction to freeze your joint accounts. Based on what I'm seeing here, there's a pattern of financial deception that could escalate once Mr. Sinclair realizes his situation has been discovered." His words snapped me back to reality. This wasn't just an emotional betrayal. It was potentially financial ruin in the making. "You're right," I said, pulling out my phone. "I need to call my lawyer again." As I stepped onto the deck to make the call, I heard Diane gently questioning Melanie inside. Good. We needed information, and Melanie might be the key to understanding the full scope of Nathan's deception. Martin answered on the second ring. "Rebecca, how did it go?" "Worse than we thought," I replied, keeping my voice low. "Nathan's not just having an affair. He's created an entire second life. The woman is pregnant, and he performed some kind of fake marriage ceremony with her last year," Martin cursed under his breath. "Bigamy. That adds a criminal dimension to all this." Officer Daniels suggested I get an emergency injunction to freeze our accounts. "How quickly can we make that happen?" "I'll file electronically within the hour," Martin said. "But Rebecca, if he's gone this far, there's no telling what else he's done. Have you checked your investment accounts recently?" A chill ran down my spine. As a financial advisor, I managed other people's money all day. But Nathan had gradually taken over our personal finances over the past few years. I'd been grateful for one less thing to worry about. A decision that now seemed catastrophically naive. "I'll check everything right now," I said, opening my banking app. What I found made my knees buckle. Our main savings account, which should have contained just over $340,000, now showed a balance of $12,476. Our joint investment portfolio, last time I'd checked worth nearly $800,000, was almost entirely liquidated, with only about $50,000 remaining in long-term holdings that must have been too difficult to cash out quickly. Nearly $1.1 million. Gone. I leaned against the deck railing, struggling to breathe. "Martin," I managed to say. "He's cleaned us out. Almost everything is gone." "When were the withdrawals made?" I scrolled through the transaction history, my hands shaking. "It looks like he's been moving money systematically for months, but the largest transfers happened within the last 2 weeks." "That timing might work in our favor," Martin said. "Recent large transfers are easier to claw back. I'm adding this to the emergency filing. In the meantime, call your bank immediately and report potential fraud on all your accounts." As soon as I hung up with Martin, I called the fraud department of our bank. After nearly 40 minutes of verification questions and explanations, I had managed to place alerts on all remaining accounts and credit cards. The representative confirmed what I already knew. Nathan had been methodically transferring funds to accounts that weren't jointly held. When I returned inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Melanie sat on the couch, her face pale, while Diane sat next to her with a comforting hand on her shoulder. Officer Daniels was on his phone in the corner, speaking quietly but intensely. "What's happening?" I asked. Diane looked up at me. "Rebecca, you need to hear what Melanie found out." "Show her," she urged the younger woman. With trembling hands, Melanie handed me her phone. On the screen was a text exchange with someone named Lisa. Melanie: "Have you heard from Nathan today?" Lisa: "No. Why? Is something wrong?" Melanie: "Someone claiming to be his wife just showed up at the cabin with a police officer. Says she's the real owner." Lisa: "His wife? Mel, call me right now. Trina got a weird call from some bank yesterday asking about transactions Nathan made to her account. She thought it was a scam." Melanie: "What transactions? What account?" Lisa: "Trina said something about consulting fees for work she never did. Over $50K worth. Nathan told her it was a tax thing and to just ignore any questions." I looked up from the phone, my mind racing. "Who's Trina?" "My former roommate in Boston," Melanie explained, her voice hollow. "She met Nathan a few times when he would visit me before we got married, and moved here. She works in web design." Officer Daniels stepped forward. "I've just been speaking with my sergeant. Based on what we're learning, this looks like it could be a pattern of systematic fraud involving multiple victims. Mrs. Sinclair, did your husband have access to clients' funds in any way through your work?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I worked with high-net-worth clients, managing significant investment portfolios. While Nathan didn't have direct access to those accounts, he knew details about my business that could potentially be exploited. "I need to call my firm immediately," I said, suddenly feeling lightheaded. If Nathan had somehow compromised client accounts, the damage could be catastrophic, not just to those clients but to my professional reputation and licensure, EDD. Placed the call to my managing partner. I watched Melanie scrolling frantically through her phone, presumably reaching out to more friends. The young woman I'd been prepared to hate just hours ago was now an ally in uncovering a deception that seemed to grow more elaborate by the minute. My firm's security team promised to conduct an immediate audit of all my client accounts and access logs. They also agreed to place additional verification requirements on any withdrawal requests until the situation was clarified. As I hung up, I felt a small measure of relief. At least that avenue was being addressed. "Rebecca," Diane said quietly, "what about your house? If he's done all this, who knows what's happening there?" She was right. The cabin was just one piece of our shared assets. Our primary residence, worth considerably more, could also be at risk. "We need to go home," I said. "Now," Officer Daniels nodded. "I'll call ahead to have a patrol car meet you there. Given the circumstances, I'd recommend you not return alone." I turned to Melanie, who sat slumped on the couch, one hand resting on her pregnant belly. Despite my own crisis, I couldn't help feeling concern for her situation. Nathan had left her even more vulnerable than me, pregnant, isolated, and apparently without financial resources of her own. "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" I asked. She nodded weakly. "My sister's coming from Hartford. Should be here in about 3 hours." "Good," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "You should know that I've filed to freeze all of Nathan's accounts. That might include any he's set up for you." "He controls everything," she whispered. "The cabin, the car, our joint account. He said it was better for me to focus on the baby and let him handle the finances." It was the same pattern: isolation and financial control. The only difference was that I had escaped it by maintaining my career and some separate accounts, while Melanie had been completely ensnared. "Take this," I said, writing a check from my personal account, one Nathan couldn't access. "It's not much, but it should help until you figure things out." Her eyes widened. "Why would you help me?" "Because we're both victims here," I replied, "and women need to look out for each other." As Diane and I prepared to leave, Officer Daniels pulled me aside. "Mrs. Sinclair, based on the emerging pattern, your husband may be what we call a confidence man, someone who systematically builds trust to exploit it for financial gain. I'd be prepared for more unpleasant discoveries." I nodded, a cold resolve settling over me. "Thank you for the warning, officer. But Nathan is about to discover that he chose the wrong woman to con." The drive back from the cabin seemed to take forever. While Diane focused on the road, I made call after call, to my bank's fraud department, to Martin for updates on the emergency injunction, and to my sister Claire, who agreed to meet us at the house. "I just can't believe Nathan would do this," Diane said, breaking a long silence. "He always seemed so reliable." "That was the point," I replied, staring out the window at the passing countryside. "He cultivated that image carefully. The dependable husband, the thoughtful friend, the trustworthy partner. It was all part of the con." The word con still felt strange on my tongue. How had I married a con man without seeing it? I'd always prided myself on my judgment, my ability to assess character, skills essential to my profession. Yet I'd missed the most significant deception in my own life. "Do you think he ever loved you?" Diane asked softly. The question hit me harder than I expected. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe in the beginning. Or maybe I was just a useful mark, a financial advisor with family money and good connections." As we approached our neighborhood, I felt a strange detachment. The tree-lined streets, the familiar houses, the community I'd been part of for over a decade. It all felt like a movie set now, something constructed rather than real. A patrol car was already parked in front of our colonial-style home. 2 officers stepped out as we pulled into the driveway. Claire's SUV was there too, and she rushed over to embrace me as soon as I exited the car. "Oh, Becca," she whispered, using my childhood nickname. "I'm so sorry." I hugged her back, grateful for the comfort but already shifting into practical mode. "Let's see what else he's done," I said, pulling away gently. After introducing ourselves to the officers, Rodriguez and Chen according to their nameplates, we approached the front door. I inserted my key, half expecting it not to work, but the lock turned smoothly. The house looked normal at first glance, everything in its place in the entryway. The familiar scent of the lavender diffuser I'd refilled just yesterday. Family photos still lined the hallway wall. Nathan and me on our honeymoon in Greece, at his brother's wedding, celebrating my promotion to senior advisor. "What exactly are we looking for?" Officer Rodriguez asked. "Evidence of financial documents, hidden accounts, anything that might help us trace the missing money," I explained. "And any indication of other EATS deceptions." We split up to cover more ground. Claire and Officer Chen took the guest rooms and office, while Diane and I headed for the master bedroom. Officer Rodriguez began photographing the common areas and checking for any signs of removed documents or valuables. Our bedroom appeared untouched, everything in its precisely organized state that Nathan had always insisted upon. Now I wondered if his fastidiousness had been another form of control, a way to spot if I'd been looking through his things. I started with the obvious places: dresser drawers, bedside tables, closet shelves. Nothing seemed unusual until I reached the back of his sock drawer and found it empty. "The notebook is gone," I told Diane, remembering the black journal I'd discovered just the night before. "He must have come back this morning after I left." A chill ran down my spine. Nathan had been here, removing evidence, while I was discovering Melanie at the cabin. The calculated timing was unsettling. Moving to his closet, I noticed subtle gaps in the hanging clothes. Not enough to be immediately obvious, but certain items were missing. His favorite suits, the expensive watch collection he'd built over the years, the custom shoes he insisted on having made in Italy. "He's packing out," I murmured, bit by bit, taking the valuable items. "Rebecca," Claire called from the office. "You need to see this." I hurried down the hall to what had been our shared home office before Nathan insisted on claiming it exclusively for his expanding consulting business. The room was immaculate as always, but Claire and Officer Chen had pulled out the large filing cabinet and discovered something behind it, a small wall safe I'd never seen before. "Did you know about this?" Claire asked. I shook my head, staring at the digital keypad on the metal door. It must have been installed when he renovated the office last year. He said he was just updating the built-in bookshelves. Officer Chen examined the safe. "It's a high-end model. Would he have used anything significant as the code? Birthday? Anniversary?" I tried several combinations. Our anniversary, Nathan's birthday, the date we moved into the house. None worked. Then, on a hunch, I tried the date from the most recent ultrasound picture I'd seen framed at the cabin. The safe clicked open. Inside was a trove of documents: passports in Nathan's photo but different names, financial statements from offshore accounts, and a thick folder labeled "Exit Strategy." "I need to call this in," Officer Chen said, stepping back to use her radio. "This goes beyond simple fraud." With trembling hands, I opened the Exit Strategy folder. Inside was a detailed plan for disappearing, contacts for fake identification, procedures for moving money through untraceable channels, and a list of countries without extradition treaties with the United States. Most disturbing of all was a printed email exchange with someone called the Facilitator, discussing final arrangements for clean extraction scheduled for next week. "He was planning to vanish?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Probably with Melanie and the baby, once it was born." Officer Rodriguez joined us, examining the documents with a grim expression. "This is sophisticated. Your husband isn't an amateur, Mrs. Sinclair. This level of preparation suggests he's done this before." The thought made me feel physically ill. How many other women had there been before me? How many lives had Nathan destroyed while moving from one identity to another? As the officers cataloged the safe's contents, Diane continued searching the desk, pulling open drawers and checking behind files. "Rebecca," she said, holding up a small device. "Do you know what this is?" I examined the black plastic rectangle with its small lens. "It looks like some kind of camera." Officer Rodriguez took it from her. "It's a monitoring device. Records. Video and audio. Probably connects to a smartphone app." He looked around the room carefully, then pointed to a small air vent in the ceiling. "I'm guessing it was hidden up there. He's been watching the office remotely." The invasion of privacy, in my own home, sent a wave of violation through me. Nathan had been monitoring me, perhaps for years, gathering information and staying. "One step ahead. Check the other rooms," I said urgently. "There might be more." A systematic search revealed 4 additional cameras, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, one in the master bedroom, and one pointed directly at the front door. Nathan had turned our entire home into a surveillance operation. This changes things, Officer Chen said, bagging the devices as evidence. With this level of premeditation and the false identification documents, we're looking at potential federal charges. I'm calling in our financial crimes division. As the implications sank in, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from a number I didn't recognize. I know what you found. You always were too smart for your own good, Becca. Don't bother looking for me. By the time you figure it all out, I'll be gone. Nothing personal, just business. I showed the message to Officer Rodriguez, who immediately called it in to be traced, though we all knew it was likely a burner phone that would lead nowhere. The message confirmed what I already suspected. Nathan had been alerted, perhaps by his surveillance systems, and now knew that his carefully constructed world was collapsing. He was in wind-down mode, preparing for his escape. But he had underestimated me. Again. I need access to his computer. I told the officers. If he's been monitoring the cameras remotely, there might be a trail we can follow. Detective Harris from the Financial Crimes Unit arrived within the hour. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with salt-and-pepper hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. After reviewing the evidence, she didn't mince words. Your husband has been operating what we call a long con, she explained as we sat at my kitchen table. He establishes relationships with targets, usually successful women, and systematically drains their assets over time. Based on the documentation we found, you're not his first victim. I stared at the array of false passports spread before me. Different names, slightly different looks, shorter hair, glasses, a beard, but always Nathan's eyes looking back at me. Eyes I'd gazed into for 15 years, believing I saw love reflected there. So everything was a lie, I said flatly. Our entire marriage. Detective Harris's expression softened slightly. Not necessarily everything. Con artists often incorporate genuine elements into their deceptions. It makes the lies more convincing and easier to maintain. Small comfort, I thought bitterly. The most pressing issue, Detective Harris continued, is locating him before he can leave the country. Based on the documents in the safe, he's been moving assets through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. We've alerted TSA and Border Patrol, but he likely has fake identification we haven't discovered yet. While the officers continued their investigation at the house, I retreated to the sunroom with Diane and Claire, trying to process the unimaginable reality I now faced. I can't believe I never saw it, I said, staring blankly at the garden outside. 15 years and I never once suspected. Claire squeezed my hand. Because you're a good person who trusts people. He took advantage of that. And I led him right. To my clients, I added, the professional implications hitting me anew. If he's compromised any of their accounts, that's not on you, Diane insisted. Your firm is doing a full audit, and the detective said there's no evidence he accessed your client files. My phone rang, Martin with an update. The judge granted the emergency injunction, he reported. All your joint accounts are frozen, and I've filed paperwork to secure your personal assets. The court has also issued a temporary restraining order against Nathan. Thank you, Martin, I said, but I don't think a restraining order will stop someone with multiple identities and an exit strategy. Probably not, he conceded. But it gives law enforcement additional grounds for arrest if they locate him. Have you considered what you want to do about the cabin? The cabin, where another woman had been living my life in parallel. It's mine. Legally, I said. I want to keep it. Good, Martin replied. I'll make sure it's specifically protected in the divorce filing. Divorce. The word felt surreal. I wasn't just ending a marriage, I was disentangling myself from an elaborate fiction. As I hung up, Officer Rodriguez approached. Mrs. Sinclair, we've got something. Your husband's computer has an active email account we've accessed. There's a confirmation for a meeting tonight at 8 p.m. My pulse quickened. Where? The Westbrook Marina. Slip 42. Does that mean anything to you? I nodded slowly. We kept a small boat there. Nathan said it was his stress relief. He goes sailing on weekends. Detective Harris joined us. This could be our opportunity to apprehend him. He might be planning to use the boat as part of his escape. I want to be there, I said immediately. Detective Harris shook her head. That's not advisable, Mrs. Sinclair. This is a law enforcement operation, and your husband could be dangerous. With all due respect, Detective, you don't know Nathan. He's careful, observant. If he sees police at the marina, he'll vanish. But he won't expect me to be there. He thinks I'm still dealing with the chaos he created. Detective Harris considered this. What exactly are you proposing? Let me approach him, wear a wire, get him talking. Once you have what you need, move in and arrest him. The detective exchanged glances with Officer Rodriguez. It's unorthodox, she admitted. But she has a point. If he's as sophisticated as his preparations suggest, a standard stakeout might not work. I need to do this, I insisted. Not just for the case, but for me. I need to look him in the eye, just once, knowing the truth. After some discussion and my signing of multiple liability waivers, a plan was formed. I would meet Nathan at the marina, wearing a concealed recording device. A team of officers would be stationed nearby, ready to move in once Nathan incriminated himself. As dusk fell, I prepared for the confrontation. I chose clothes Nathan would expect: tailored slacks, a cashmere sweater, the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 10th anniversary. The familiar outfit felt like a costume now, a remnant from a life that no longer existed. Detective Harris helped me adjust the wire hidden beneath my sweater. Remember, the goal is to get him talking about the fraud, the false identities, and his plans to flee. Don't put yourself at risk. If you feel threatened, use the code word moonlight, and we'll move in immediately. I nodded, surprisingly calm. The shock had given way to a cold, focused anger, not just at Nathan, but at myself for being deceived for so long. Tonight, at least, I would reclaim some control. The marina was quiet as I pulled into the parking lot at 7:45 p.m. A few boat owners worked on their vessels in the fading light, but the usual weekend bustle was absent. I made my way to Slip 42, where our 30-foot sailboat New Horizons was moored. The boat's name struck me as cruelly ironic now. I spotted him before he saw me, a silhouette against the darkening sky, loading duffel bags onto the boat. He moved with the efficient grace I'd always admired, unaware that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. "Planning a trip?" I called out, my voice steadier than I expected. Nathan froze, then turned slowly. In the dim marina lighting, his expression shifted from shock to calculation in a matter of seconds. "Rebecca," he said, recovering quickly. "This is a surprise. I thought you were visiting friends this evening." Another lie, seamlessly delivered. I wondered how many thousands of lies had passed those lips over the years. "I was at the cabin today," I said, stepping closer to the boat. "Met your other wife. Melanie, right? Lovely girl. Very pregnant." Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, perhaps, or annoyance at having his plans disrupted. But his voice remained calm. "I can explain that situation." "Can you? Can you also explain the fake passports in our office safe, or the missing $1 million from our accounts, or the detailed exit strategy I found?" His posture changed subtly. Tension, replacing the practiced ease. He glanced quickly toward the parking lot, checking for police, then back at me. "You've been busy," he said, a new edge to his voice. "So have you," I replied. "Running quite the operation, Nathan. Or should I call you David? Or Michael? Or whichever identity you're using these days?" He sighed, setting down the bag he was holding. "You weren't supposed to find out this way. I had a plan to end things more amicably. By disappearing with all my money?" I stepped onto the boat's deck, ignoring the warning look he gave me. How many others were there before me, Nathan? How many women did you marry, Rob, and abandon? Does it matter? He asked, his facade finally cracking. It's business, Rebecca. Nothing personal. 15 years of my life is very personal, I countered, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. A baby on the way is personal. The baby was unexpected, he admitted with a shrug. Complicated things. But it created great cover for moving larger sums without raising suspicion. Baby expenses, you know? His casual tone, the utter lack of remorse. Something broke inside me. You're a monster, I whispered. Nathan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Monster is a bit dramatic, don't you think? I provided you with companionship, security, the appearance of a perfect marriage. Many would say you got 15 good years. Good years built on lies, I said, struggling to maintain my composure. I needed to keep him talking, to get the evidence Detective Harris needed. Was any of it real, Nathan? Did you ever love me at all? He considered the question, tilting his head slightly as if genuinely reflecting on it. I appreciated you, he said finally. You were intelligent, successful, not overly demanding, better than most Marks. Marks. The word cut through me like a blade. That's all I'd ever been to him, a target, a source of income, a stepping stone to his next identity. And Melanie? I asked, remembering the frightened young woman at the cabin. Does she get the same appreciation speech when you abandon her and your child? Something hardened in his expression. Melanie made things more complicated than they needed to be. Getting pregnant wasn't part of the plan. So you were going to leave her too. Eventually, he shrugged. Though I'd have stayed through the birth. Children can be useful leverage in certain situations. The casual cruelty of his statement made me physically recoil. This man, this stranger wearing my husband's face, was contemplating using his own child as a tool for manipulation. How do you sleep at night? I whispered. Quite well, actually, he replied, resuming his task of loading bags onto the boat. Everyone lies, Rebecca. I just built a career around it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a tight schedule to maintain. You're not going anywhere, I said, blocking his path to the cabin door. The police know everything. Your accounts are frozen. Your passports have been confiscated. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his features. You're bluffing. Am I? They found the safe, Nathan. The exit strategy folder. The offshore accounts. It's over. He stepped closer, his familiar cologne, the same scent I'd bought him for Christmas, now making me nauseated. If that were true, he said quietly, there would be officers swarming this marina. You came alone. My heart raced, but I held my ground. I needed answers before they arrest you. I needed to understand how 15 years of my life could mean nothing. Nathan studied my face, likely searching for signs of deception, the same way I should have scrutinized him all these years. Then he laughed, a cold, hollow sound that bore no resemblance to the warm laughter I thought I knew. You want to understand? Fine. Here's your explanation. He gestured expansively at the boat, at the marina, at the life he was preparing to abandon. This is a job. You were a job. A long-term investment that finally matured. Nothing more. Our wedding vows? I pressed, each question tearing at wounds still fresh and raw. The anniversaries, the holidays with my family, the future we planned. Scripts, he said dismissively. Props, background setting. You wanted a devoted husband, so I became one. Your family wanted a son-in-law who shared their values, so I played the part. You needed to believe in our future together to keep investing in the present. As he spoke, the full weight of what I'd lost, what I'd never actually had, crashed over me. It wasn't just the money, though, that was substantial. It was the years, the trust, the intimacy. Every memory was now tainted, every happy moment suspect. When he held me after my father's funeral, had he been counting the inheritance that would soon flow into our accounts? When he surprised me with anniversary trips, had he been using them to meet with other women, other investments? You took more than money from me, I said, my voice breaking despite my determination to remain strong. You took my ability to trust. Something shifted in his expression, not quite remorse, but perhaps a flicker of recognition. That's the cost of lessons like these, he said, his tone almost gentle. Trust is a luxury you can no longer afford. He reached past me to open the cabin door, his arm brushing mine in a gesture once so familiar, now repulsive. For what it's worth, he added, you are my longest relationship. There's a certain respect in that. Respect? I echoed incredulously. You drained our accounts. You created a parallel life with another woman. You were preparing to disappear without a word. That's not respect, Nathan. That's contempt. He shrugged. Business decisions, not personal judgments. Our marriage was personal to me. The words burst from me with unexpected force. I built my life around you. I defended you to friends who thought you were too controlling. I trusted you with everything. My home, my finances, my heart. And that, he said softly, was your mistake. Something inside me snapped, not toward violence or hysteria, but toward clarity. This man, this hollow shell of practiced charm and calculated gestures, had never been worthy of my love. The husband I grieved had never existed. No, I replied, a strange calm settling over me. My mistake was giving you 15 years to perfect your con, but that ends tonight. I reached for my phone, pressing a single button. Moonlight, I said clearly. Nathan's eyes widened with sudden understanding, his hand darting inside his jacket. But before he could react further, floodlights illuminated the marina. Officers emerged from their hiding places, surrounding the boat with weapons drawn. Nathan. Sinclair, Detective Harris called through a megaphone. You are under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. Step away from Mrs. Sinclair and put your hands where we can see them. For one tense moment, Nathan's eyes locked with mine, cold fury replacing the calculated charm. Then, with the practiced ease of someone who had reinvented himself many times, his expression shifted to resignation. He raised his hand slowly. Well played, he said quietly as officers boarded the boat. I underestimated you. Everyone does, I replied, stepping back to allow the officers access. As they handcuffed him and recited his rights, I watched the facade fall away completely. The man being led from the boat was a stranger, harder, colder, emptier than the Nathan I thought I knew. Yet in some terrible way, this was the most honest I'd ever seen him. Detective Harris approached, concern evident in her expression. Are you all right, Mrs. Sinclair? You did extremely well. I nodded, unable to find words as I watched Nathan being placed in a police car. We found additional documentation in the boat's cabin, she continued. Account numbers, contact information, for his associates, even a list of previous targets. How many? I asked, my voice barely audible over the marina's suddenly chaotic atmosphere. At least 4 other women before you, she said gently. Dating back nearly 20 years. You're the first to catch him. There was no satisfaction in the knowledge, only a profound sadness for the women who had come before me. Women who had loved and trusted as I had, only to be discarded when they no longer served his purpose. As the police car containing my husband pulled away, I remained on the dock, watching until its taillights disappeared into the night. 15 years of memories, rendered meaningless in a single day. A life I'd believed in, revealed as an elaborate production. Yet amid the devastation, a small, determined voice inside me whispered that this was not the end of my story, merely the end of his chapter in it. The days following Nathan's arrest passed in a blur of police interviews, legal consultations, and sleepless nights. I moved through it all with a strange detachment, as if watching someone else's life unravel instead of my own. Claire insisted I stay with her rather than return to the house filled with surveillance cameras and deception. "You need to eat something," she said, setting a plate of untouched scrambled eggs in front of me one morning. "You've barely had 3 bites since yesterday." I nodded absently, pushing the food around with my fork. "They found 2 more women," I said. "In addition to the 4 Detective Harris mentioned." Claire sat across from me, her face etched with concern. 7 women total? That they know of. Spanning almost 25 years. I set down my fork, unable to pretend interest in food. He had a system, Claire. A methodology. He targeted professional women with assets and few family connections. I fit his profile perfectly. The detective had been gentle but thorough in explaining what they'd discovered. Nathan, whose real name turned out to be Peter Kellerman, had refined his approach over decades. Each relationship followed a similar pattern: courtship, marriage, gradual isolation, financial consolidation, and finally, disappearance with the assets. The only deviation in my case had been the length of the con. 15 years was significantly longer than his usual 4 to 7. "He must have considered you a premium investment," Detective Harris had explained, not unkindly. "Your career provided ongoing access to new resources, unlike his previous targets who had fixed assets. The clinical assessment of my value as a mark had made me physically ill." "Have you thought more about talking to the therapist Martin recommended?" Claire asked, breaking into my thoughts. I sighed. What would I even say? My entire adult life was based on a lie perpetrated by a professional con man who never loved me, if that's what you need to say. Yes. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Becca, you're a victim of long-term psychological manipulation. That's a kind of trauma." Trauma. The word felt both inadequate and overwhelming. How do you categorize the systematic dismantling of your reality? What box do you check on a form to indicate that every happy memory, every intimate moment, every shared dream had been a calculated performance? "I just keep wondering when it started," I said, voicing a thought that had haunted me since the arrest. When the real Nathan Peter disappeared and the con began. Was it there from the beginning? Was there ever a moment of genuine connection? Claire didn't offer empty reassurances, for which I was grateful. Instead, she asked, "Does it help or hurt to speculate about that?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I can't stop myself from rewinding, reviewing every memory for clues I missed." Truth was, I had started to see patterns in retrospect. The way Nathan had initially pursued me, charming, attentive, seemingly aligned with all my values and interests. How he'd swept me off my feet with grand romantic gestures while carefully assessing my financial standing. The subtle ways he'd isolated me from friends who asked too many questions. His insistence on handling our finances once we married, had been warning signs, red flags that I had willfully ignored or rationalized away. His reluctance to discuss his past in detail. The convenient estrangement from his family that prevented me from knowing his background too well. The business trips that grew more frequent over the years. "I was so blind," I whispered. "You were in love," Claire corrected. "There's a difference." My phone buzzed with a text from Martin, a welcome interruption from my spiral of self-recrimination. "The forensic accountants have traced some of your money. They've frozen several offshore accounts linked to Nathan. Call me when you can." It was the first piece of positive news in days. A small victory in the battle to reclaim what was mine. That afternoon, I met with Detective Harris at the station for another interview. She had new information to share. They'd located Nathan's first wife, a woman named Susan Porter, who now lived in Arizona. "She's willing to speak with you," Detective Harris said, sliding a phone number across the table. Said it might help to talk to someone who understands. I stared at the number, a strange connection to another woman who had once believed herself loved by the same phantom. How long was she married to him? I asked. 4 years from 1998 to 2002? She was a real estate developer in Seattle. Lost nearly everything when he disappeared. A real estate developer, a financial advisor. I wondered about the others, what professions, what lives had Nathan targeted and dismantled for profit. She rebuilt, Detective Harris added, perhaps sensing my thoughts. New career, new relationship, seems to be doing well. Said to tell you it doesn't define you forever. I tucked the number into my purse, not yet sure if I would use it. The detective had more to share. They'd discovered a storage unit rented under one of Nathan's aliases in a neighboring town. Inside were meticulous records of his previous identities and relationships, a trophy collection of sorts, documenting his successes. There was a file on you, she said hesitantly. Quite detailed. Notes on your habits, preferences, financial decisions, going back to before you met. My stomach dropped. He was researching me before we even met? She nodded grimly. It appears he identified you as a potential target through a financial conference you spoke at in 2005. There are photographs, notes on your presentation. The implications were staggering. Our chance meeting at a charity gala 3 months later, the spilled champagne, the charming apology, the immediate connection, had been meticulously orchestrated. The beginning of our love story, which I had recounted fondly countless times, had been the opening gambit in an elaborate confidence scheme. I'd like to see it, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The file. I want to see exactly what he saw in me that made me a suitable target. Detective Harris looked uncertain. It's evidence in an ongoing investigation. And frankly, Mrs. Sinclair, it's disturbing. His observations are extremely calculating. I need to know, I insisted. I've spent 15 years being manipulated by information I didn't have. I won't spend another day in the dark. After some discussion, arrangements were made for me to view the file under supervision the following day. As I prepared to leave, Detective Harris handed me a business card. This is Dr. Levine, a psychologist who specializes in cases like yours, survivors of psychological manipulation and identity fraud. She's helped other victims like Susan Porter. I'd strongly encourage you to call her. I accepted the card, adding it to the growing collection of resources for piecing my life back together. That evening, alone in Claire's guest room, I finally called the number Detective Harris had given. Me. Susan Porter answered on the third ring. I've been expecting your call, she said, her voice warm and direct. You must be Rebecca. Yes, I replied, suddenly unsure what to say to this stranger who shared such an intimate connection to my pain. I'm not sure why I'm calling exactly. Because you need to know you're not alone, she said simply. Because you need to hear from someone who survived what you're going through. How? I asked, the single word encompassing so many questions. How did you rebuild? How did you trust again? How did you stop blaming yourself? One day at a time, she replied, seemingly understanding all I hadn't articulated. First, you grieve. Not just for the relationship, but for the person you thought you knew who never existed. That's a unique kind of loss. Her words unlocked something in me. Permission to mourn what hadn't been real but had felt real to me. Tears came then, for the first time since discovering Nathan's betrayal. He took so much, I managed between sobs. Yes, Susan agreed. But not everything. Not the core of who you are. That's what I had to remember. He stole my money, my trust, years of my life. But he didn't get to take my future too. That remained mine. As we talked into the night, I began to see the faintest outline of a path forward, not through forgetting or denying what had happened, but through reclaiming my narrative from the man who had hijacked it for so long. The preliminary hearing. For Nathan, or Peter Kellerman, as I forced myself to think of him now, was scheduled for early March, nearly 2 months after his arrest. In the intervening weeks, the full scope of his crimes continued to unfold like a nightmare that refused to end. The forensic accountants had traced some of my missing funds through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts, but recovering the money would be a lengthy process. Meanwhile, I faced the immediate reality of financial damage control. Though my personal accounts remained intact, our joint investments had been decimated, and my credit was in shambles from fraudulent loans taken out in my name. It's like trying to rebuild while the ground is still shaking, I told Dr. Levine during one of our twice-weekly sessions. I had finally taken Detective Harris's advice and begun therapy, recognizing that this was not something I could process alone. That's a very apt metaphor, she replied. The ongoing investigation keeps triggering new revelations, new betrayals to process. It's difficult to heal when the wounds keep reopening. But there was no alternative except to move forward. I returned to work, grateful for my firm's understanding and support. They had conducted a thorough audit and found no compromise to client accounts, a small mercy in the avalanche of disaster. Still, I felt exposed under the sympathetic glances of colleagues who had read about the case in the local news. Infamous. Financial advisor's husband revealed as serial con man, the headlines had proclaimed, thrusting my private pain into public view. Reporters called seeking interviews, which I declined. Distant acquaintances reached out with a mix of genuine concern and voyeuristic curiosity. Even grocery shopping became an exercise in avoiding pitying looks from strangers who recognized me from the news coverage. Through it all, I found myself unexpectedly connected to a network of Nathan's other victims. After my initial conversation with Susan Porter, she had introduced me to 2 other women who had survived his deception. We formed an unlikely support group, united by our shared experience of loving and losing the same phantom. He used the same anniversary gift routine on you too? Vanessa, wife number 4, asked during one of our video calls. The weekend getaway where he coincidentally needed your signature on investment paperwork? I nodded, remembering our 10th anniversary trip to Napa Valley, where Nathan had presented me with diamond earrings while slipping in documentation for what I now knew were fraudulent transfers. Classic Peter, Janet, wife number 3, said with a bitter laugh. He never wastes a good technique. Too efficient for that. There was something strangely healing about these conversations, about recognizing the patterns and scripts he had used across all our relationships. It diminished the special pain of believing I had been uniquely deceived, uniquely blind. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings ground forward with excruciating slowness. Nathan had hired a high-profile defense attorney who specialized in financial crimes, paid for, no doubt, with my stolen funds. They attempted to negotiate a plea deal that would reduce his potential sentence from decades to mere years. He's claiming he'll provide information about an international fraud network in exchange for leniency, Martin explained after one particularly frustrating hearing. The prosecutor is considering it. So he gets to manipulate the justice system, too? I asked, anger flaring. Use other criminals as bargaining chips the same way he used us? Martin's expression was sympathetic but pragmatic. The DA cares about the bigger picture, taking down networks that perpetrate these crimes on a larger scale. But the good news is that the plea deal would still include full restitution to all victims. Restitution. As if money could compensate for the years of emotional investment, the psychological damage, the shattered ability to trust. Still, I recognized that financial recovery was necessary for rebuilding my life, so I reluctantly supported the prosecutor's decision to pursue the deal. A more immediate challenge emerged in the form of Melanie, who had reached out through her attorney requesting a meeting. 5 months pregnant when I discovered her at the cabin, she was now nearing her due date, still processing her own version of betrayal while preparing to become a single mother. I hesitated, unsure if connecting with her would help or harm my healing process. Dr. Levine encouraged me to consider it. She's in a unique position, she pointed out. Unlike the previous women, her relationship with Nathan overlapped with yours, and she's carrying his child, a complication none of the others faced. After careful consideration, I agreed to meet Melanie at a quiet cafe halfway between our respective temporary homes. She arrived first, her pregnancy now in its final stages, her face showing the strain of recent months. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. "But I think we both deserve answers, and maybe comparing notes will help." She nodded, absently tracing patterns on her swollen belly. "The police showed me the files they found in that storage unit. He had one on me too. Apparently, I was targeted because of my trust fund, money my grandparents left me that would become fully accessible when I turned 30 or had a child. The calculated cruelty of it hit me anew. So the pregnancy wasn't an accident," she finished grimly. "At least not on his part. I found prenatal vitamins in his toiletry bag 3 weeks before I actually told him I was pregnant. He was tampering with my birth control. I felt physically ill. Nathan, Peter, had deliberately created a human life as part of his financial scheme, viewing a child as nothing more than a tool to access Melanie's inheritance." "I'm so sorry," I said, the words woefully inadequate. She shrugged, a gesture of forced nonchalance that didn't match the pain in her eyes. "I've made peace with it mostly. Whatever his intentions, this baby is mine, not his. I won't let his actions define my child's life." Her resilience was humbling. "How have you been managing? Financially, I mean." "My sister's been helping. And I've been working remotely. I'm a graphic designer." She hesitated. "Actually, that's partly why I wanted to meet. I received a letter from Nathan's attorney yesterday." She pulled an envelope from her bag and slid it across the table. Inside was a letter outlining a proposed arrangement. In exchange for Melanie not pursuing criminal charges related to reproductive coercion, Nathan would sign away all parental rights and provide substantial child support drawn from undisclosed assets not currently known to authorities. "He's still hiding money," I said, anger rising. "And using this baby as a bargaining chip again," Melanie nodded. "I don't want his money, but I do want him to relinquish parental rights. I can't bear the thought of him having any legal claim to my child." "Have you shown this to the prosecutor?" "Not yet," she admitted. "I wanted your perspective. First, we're both his victims, but you've been dealing with this longer. What would you do?" The question gave me pause. What would I do, faced with this particular moral dilemma? Accept a private settlement that secured her child's future, but potentially allowed Nathan to keep hidden assets? Or reject it on principle, ensuring he faced full consequences but possibly entangling her child in years of legal battles over paternity and custody? "I think," I said carefully, "that you need to protect your child first. If that means accepting his offer of relinquishing parental rights, do it. But I'd also share this with the prosecutor. They need to know he's still hiding assets." She seemed relieved by my answer. That's what I was thinking too. I just needed to hear I wasn't betraying some victim solidarity code by considering his offer. "There's no rulebook for this," I said with a sad smile. "We're all just trying to rebuild as best we can." As our conversation continued, I found myself drawn to Melanie's determination to create something positive from her devastation. Despite everything, she spoke of the future with cautious hope. Plans for her child, for her career, for healing. It was a perspective I desperately needed. A reminder that while Nathan had derailed my life, he didn't get to determine its ultimate destination. The courtroom was silent as Nathan, now formally referred to as Peter Kellerman in all proceedings, was led in for sentencing. 4 months had passed since his arrest, months filled with depositions, evidence hearings, and negotiations. In the end, he had accepted a plea deal, admitting to multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation in exchange for a reduced sentence. I sat in the front row alongside Melanie, who had given birth to a healthy baby girl just 3 weeks earlier. Susan Porter had flown in from Arizona, and Janet and Vanessa joined us in a show of solidarity. Together, we represented over 3 decades of his deception, united not by our connection to him, but by our determination to see justice served. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, reviewed the case documents one final time before addressing the court. Mr. Kellerman, the crimes you have committed are not simply financial in nature, though the monetary damage exceeds $2 million across multiple victims. More significantly, you have perpetrated a profound breach of trust and human dignity, using intimate relationships as vehicles for exploitation. Nathan stood impassively, the practiced charm now completely absent from his expression. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the harsh fluorescent lighting and the weight of his exposed deceptions. Before I pronounce sentence, the victims have requested the opportunity to address you directly. The court grants this request. One by one, we rose to speak. Susan went first, describing how it had taken her nearly a decade to trust enough to form another relationship. Janet spoke of the years spent rebuilding her credit and financial stability after losing her home and savings. Vanessa recounted the shame and self-doubt that had plagued her for years, making her question her own judgment in every aspect of life. When my turn came, I approached the podium with steady steps, meeting Nathan's gaze directly for the first time since his arrest. For 15 years, I believed I was married to a man named Nathan Sinclair, I began. I now understand that person never existed. He was a fictional character created and performed by the defendant for financial gain. Nathan's expression remained carefully neutral, but I caught the slight tightening of his jaw, a tell I had learned to recognize during our years together. What the defendant failed to anticipate was that his victims would find each other, that we would transform our individual pain into collective strength. He underestimated our resilience, our capacity to rebuild, and most importantly, our determination to ensure he never victimizes another woman. I turned to address the judge directly. Your Honor, no sentence can restore the years we lost or undo the emotional damage inflicted. But today's judgment can provide a measure of closure and the knowledge that Peter Kellerman's career of exploitation has reached its end. As I returned to my seat, Melanie squeezed my hand in silent support. Then she rose, cradling her infant daughter, and delivered the final statement, brief but devastating in its impact. This man calculated the conception of a child as part of a financial scheme, she said, her voice unwavering. He viewed my daughter as nothing more than a transaction. That is the true measure of his character. The judge's sentence came swiftly. 18 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for at least 12, and a restitution order covering the full amount stolen plus punitive damages. Additionally, all parental rights to Melanie's daughter were permanently terminated. As Nathan was led away, he turned back once, his eyes meeting mine in a final, inscrutable look. I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only relief that this chapter was closing. The resolution wasn't perfect, but it was final. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by the women who had become an unexpected source of strength, I faced the waiting reporters with newfound confidence. Today isn't about vengeance, I told them. It's about accountability and the beginning of healing. Not just for us, but for any woman who has been manipulated or deceived. Our message is simple. You are not alone, you are not to blame, and there is life after betrayal. 6 months after the sentencing, I stood alone on the deck of the lakeside cabin, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and gold. This place, once the site of discovery and betrayal, had gradually transformed in my mind from a symbol of deception to a sanctuary of my own making. I had reclaimed it deliberately, refusing to let Nathan's actions taint something that had always brought me joy. The cabin was mine now, legally and emotionally. I had removed the surveillance cameras, replaced the furniture, and painted the walls in colors I'd always preferred, but Nathan had dismissed as too bold. The process of rebuilding extended far beyond physical spaces. Financially, I had recovered approximately 60% of the stolen assets, with ongoing efforts to trace the remainder through international banking channels. My credit had been restored through identity theft protocols, and my career had not only survived but thrived. My transparency about being victimized had resonated with clients concerned about financial security. But the deeper work had been internal, a painstaking inventory of truth and falsehood in the relationship that had defined my adult life. The hardest part, I had told Dr. Levine in our session earlier that day, is separating the genuine moments from the performance. Were there ever times when he wasn't playing a role? When the man I knew as Nathan was showing something real? Had posed a question in response. Does the answer change your path forward? I considered this now as I sipped my tea, watching a pair of loons glide across the lake's surface. Perhaps it didn't matter whether Nathan had ever felt genuine connection. What mattered was that my feelings had been real. My capacity for love, trust, and commitment remained intact despite his betrayal. The relationships formed in the aftermath had proved this truth. My unexpected friendship with Melanie had evolved into something meaningful. I had become a sort of aunt to her daughter Lily, whose bright spirit showed no trace of her father's calculation. The bond with Susan, Janet, and Vanessa continued, our shared experience creating a foundation for genuine understanding. Most surprisingly, I had begun dating again, cautiously, with the full awareness that trust would be a gradual journey rather than an immediate gift. Michael, a widowed architect I'd met through a client, understood my need for transparency and patience. He showed his reliability through consistency rather than grand gestures, and I found myself slowly opening to the possibility of connection. Again, my reflection was interrupted by a text from Claire. Just checking in. How's the cabin retreat going? Healing, I replied simply. And it was true. Each day put more distance between the woman I had been, defined by Nathan's deception, and the woman I was becoming. More discerning, yet still capable of openness. More self-reliant, yet willing to accept support. Scarred, but not hardened. As darkness fell over the lake, I lit the fireplace and settled into a comfortable chair with the journal Dr. Levine had encouraged me to keep. On its pages, I had documented my journey from victim to survivor to something beyond labels. A woman reclaiming her narrative word by word, day by day. The final betrayal, I wrote, would be allowing his actions to determine my capacity for joy, trust, and connection. I choose a different ending to this story. 1 year after discovering Nathan's betrayal, I stood in the newly renovated living room of my home, not the house I had shared with him, which I had sold months earlier, but a light-filled townhouse closer to my office. The space reflected my tastes entirely. Modern art on the walls, books arranged by color rather than alphabetically, something Nathan had always criticized, and comfortable furniture chosen for enjoyment rather than appearance. It's perfect, Claire declared, setting down a housewarming gift on the kitchen island. Completely and authentically you. That was the goal of everything I had done in the past year. Authenticity. Stripping away the compromises and accommodations I had made during 15 years with Nathan, rediscovering preferences and passions I had set aside to maintain harmony in our marriage. The reconstruction wasn't just physical or financial, though. Those elements had been significant. I had taken the settlement money from selling our former home and invested it in a foundation that provided financial literacy education to women emerging from abusive relationships. The program, which I named Phoenix Funds, emphasized recognizing financial control and building independence. My professional life had evolved as well. Within my firm, I had developed a specialization in working with divorced women and widows, navigating sudden financial responsibility. My personal experience had given me insight into the emotional aspects of financial recovery that textbooks couldn't teach. "Have you heard from Melanie recently?" Claire asked as we shared takeout on my new patio furniture. I nodded, smiling. "She sent pictures of Lily's first birthday party last week. She's walking now, getting into everything." Melanie had moved back to Boston, rebuilding her graphic design career with remarkable resilience. We maintained regular contact, united by our shared experience but increasingly connected by genuine friendship rather than mutual trauma. The support network that had formed among Nathan's victims had expanded to include other women with similar stories. What had begun as 5 women comparing notes on a single con man had evolved into an informal advocacy group, sharing resources and providing emotional support to dozens facing similar betrayals. Susan Porter had become particularly active, using her platform as a successful real estate investor to speak publicly about financial deception and relationship fraud. Her TED Talk, "After the Con: Rebuilding Trust in Yourself," had gone viral, bringing attention to a type of victimization often minimized or misunderstood. My own healing had been neither linear nor simple. There were still nights when memories ambushed me, moments when trust felt impossible, days when anger flared unexpectedly. But I had learned to navigate these emotions without being defined by them. "The reconstruction is never complete," Dr. Levine had told me in our final regular session. "It's ongoing, evolving as you evolve. The goal isn't to return to who you were before. That's impossible. The goal is to create something new, something that incorporates the experience without being limited by it." Those words guided my approach to everything, from redesigning my living space to rebuilding my capacity for intimacy. My relationship with Michael progressed slowly but steadily, built on explicit communication and mutual respect rather than romantic whirlwind. As Claire helped me hang the last of my artwork, a painting I had created during an art therapy workshop, I realized that reconstruction wasn't about erasing what had happened. It was about building something new and meaningful from the materials left behind. 5 years after discovering my husband's secret life, I stood before an audience of 300 women at a conference titled "Rebuilding After Betrayal." The attendees included financial professionals, therapists, legal experts, and women at various stages of recovery from relationship fraud. When my husband moved his pregnant girlfriend into our vacation home, I thought my life was ending. I began, the words no longer carrying the sting they once had. Instead, it was beginning again, differently than I had planned, but with purpose and authenticity I couldn't have imagined. From the front row, familiar faces smiled encouragement. Susan, Janet, Vanessa, and Melanie, whose daughter Lily, now a spirited 6-year-old, sat beside her coloring quietly. Claire and my now husband Michael watched from the side of the stage, their presence a reminder of the genuine support that had replaced Nathan's calculated performance of devotion. The journey from that shocking day at the cabin to this moment of advocacy had not been direct or simple. There had been setbacks, the discovery of additional victims who came forward after Nathan's conviction, the legal battles to recover hidden assets, the occasional nightmares that still disrupted my sleep. But each challenge had been met with a growing resilience and an expanding community of support. "The transcendence comes," I told the audience, "not when you forget what happened, but when you realize it no longer defines you. When the betrayal becomes part of your story rather than the whole of it." That transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had emerged gradually through concrete actions and deliberate choices. The foundation that had now helped over 500 women achieve financial independence. The best-selling book I had co-authored with Dr. Levine on recognizing and recovering from relationship fraud. The quarterly retreats at my cabin, now a healing space where women rebuilding after similar betrayals could find community and restoration. Most significantly, my experience had led to legislative change. Working with advocacy groups and sympathetic lawmakers, I had helped draft the Sinclair Act, which established relationship fraud involving financial exploitation as a specific category of crime with enhanced penalties and expanded recovery options for victims. The ultimate victory, I concluded, isn't just surviving betrayal, it's creating meaning from it. It's using your experience to illuminate the path for others, to transform personal pain into collective healing. As I stepped away from the podium to enthusiastic applause, I felt the full circle moment. From victim to advocate, from isolation to community, from devastation to purpose. Nathan remained in prison, his appeals exhausted, his hidden assets largely recovered. His power over my life had diminished until it became merely historical, a chapter rather than the narrative. Later that evening, as our extended chosen family gathered for dinner at a local restaurant, Melanie raised her glass in a toast. "To Rebecca," she said, "who showed me that the end of one story can be the beginning of a better one." I smiled, looking around at the faces that had become my true family, people connected not by deception but by genuine love and shared growth. The betrayal that had once seemed unbearable had led, through pain and persistence, to this moment of authentic connection. "To all of us," I amended, raising my own glass. "And to the futures we choose for ourselves." The path forward wasn't perfect or certain, but it was genuinely mine. A life transcending betrayal to embrace possibility, vulnerability, and truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.